Picture this. It's a moonless night on a remote Norwegian fjord. The year could be 793 AD, or it could be 2023. Two shadows move through the darkness with deadly precision. One carries a battle axe forged in fire and legend. The other grips the most advanced tactical rifle money can buy. Both are trained killers. Both have spent their lives preparing for war. But only one will walk away. Throughout history, warriors have been measured by their ability to adapt, survive, and conquer. The Vikings terrorized Europe for 3 centuries with nothing but iron weapons and wooden ships. Navy SEALs represent the pinnacle of modern military technology and training. But here's the question that will haunt you. Strip away the 1,000 years between them, place them on equal ground, and who emerges victorious? Tonight, we're about to find out something that military historians have debated in secret for decades. The answer might shock you. They called them the Northmen, the sea wolves, the fury of the north wind made flesh. But the name that struck terror into the hearts of medieval Europe was simpler: Viking. For over 300 years, from roughly 793 to 1066 AD, Nordic warriors didn't just raid coastal villages. They conquered kingdoms, discovered continents, and changed the course of human history. But here's what most people don't know about Vikings. They weren't just mindless berserkers charging into battle. They were strategic masterminds who combined psychological warfare with tactical brilliance. Take the raid on Lindisfarne in 793 AD. This wasn't random violence. The Vikings had studied their target for months, maybe years. They knew the monastery held vast treasures. They knew it was virtually undefended. And they knew that attacking a holy site would send shockwaves throughout Christian Europe. Mission accomplished. The chronicler wrote that day, "Never before has such terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from the heathen race." But the real genius of Viking warfare wasn't in their weapons, it was in their mindset. These weren't soldiers following orders from distant generals. Every Viking warrior was an entrepreneur of violence. They invested their own money in weapons and ships. They chose their own battles. Their profit was literally life or death. Consider Egil Skallagrimsson, a 10th century Viking whose saga tells us something chilling about their warrior culture. At age 7, Egil killed another child in a game dispute. By 12, he'd murdered his first adult. This wasn't considered unusual. It was considered good training. Vikings didn't just train for war, they were born into it. Archaeological evidence from burial sites reveals that Viking children were given toy weapons as infants. They learned to fight before they learned to read. By adolescence, they were expected to prove their worth in battle or face social exile. The physical conditioning was brutal beyond modern comprehension. Vikings routinely rowed ships across hundreds of miles of open ocean, then immediately engaged in hand-to-hand combat. They trained in winter conditions that would hospitalize modern athletes, and they did it all while carrying armor and weapons weighing over 60 pounds. But perhaps most terrifying of all was their relationship with death. Vikings believed that dying in battle was the only way to enter Valhalla, their warrior's paradise. This wasn't just religious belief, it was tactical advantage. When you're facing an enemy who literally believes death in combat is victory, how do you defeat them? The answer, according to medieval chroniclers, was simple. You don't. You run. Fast forward 12 centuries to a classified facility in Coronado, California. The year is 1962, and President Kennedy has just authorized the creation of something the world has never seen before. A military unit so elite so secretive, so impossibly trained, that their existence will remain largely classified for decades. They called them Navy SEALs, sea, air, and land. But insiders knew them by another name, the Invisible Warriors. What makes a Navy SEAL isn't just the training, though the training is legendary. Hell Week alone eliminates roughly 80% of candidates. 5.5 days of continuous physical and mental torture designed to break the human spirit. Candidates get perhaps 4 hours of sleep total. They carry logs weighing hundreds of pounds while instructors scream psychological warfare into their ears. They're dragged through surf so cold it causes hallucinations. But here's the secret that the Navy doesn't advertise. Hell Week isn't designed to test physical ability. It's designed to identify a specific psychological profile. SEALs aren't looking for the strongest candidates. They're looking for the ones who refuse to quit when quitting is the only logical choice. Consider the story of Richard Makowicz, a SEAL who later became famous for his television work. During Hell Week, Makowicz dislocated his shoulder so severely that medical staff recommended his immediate removal from training. His response? He popped the shoulder back into place himself and continued the exercise. When asked later why he didn't quit, his answer was chilling in its simplicity. Quitting wasn't an option I recognized. This mindset produces results that seem to defy human limitations. In 2009, SEAL Team 6 executed Operation Neptune Spear, the mission that killed Osama bin Laden. The entire operation took less than 40 minutes from insertion to extraction. They penetrated Pakistani airspace undetected, assaulted a fortified compound, eliminated their target, and extracted with 0 casualties. The precision was so perfect that neighboring houses weren't even damaged. But the real measure of SEAL effectiveness isn't in their famous missions. It's in the ones we'll never hear about. According to declassified documents, SEALs have conducted over 2,000 classified operations since 9/11 alone. Their success rate? Officially classified. Unofficially, military sources describe it as statistically impossible. The technology at their disposal reads like science fiction. Night vision that turns darkness into daylight. Communication systems that allow real-time coordination with satellite surveillance. Weapons that can accurately engage targets at distances exceeding half a mile. Medical equipment that can keep a warrior fighting through injuries that would have killed Vikings instantly. Yet technology isn't what makes SEALs legendary. It's their ability to operate independently in hostile territory for extended periods. A single SEAL team can spend months behind enemy lines with no support, no resupply, and no possibility of rescue. They become ghosts, striking from shadows and vanishing before retaliation is possible. The psychological warfare is just as sophisticated as their technology. SEALs are trained to exploit enemy fears, to turn an opponent's mind against itself. They study cultural taboos, religious beliefs, and personal phobias of their targets. Then they weaponize that knowledge. But perhaps most impressively, they've mastered something that Vikings never could: restraint. A modern SEAL can eliminate a target in a room full of civilians without harming a single innocent person. They can conduct urban warfare in populated areas with surgical precision. They've evolved warfare beyond simple violence into an art form of controlled lethality. To understand who would win this impossible battle, we need to examine what made Viking warfare so devastatingly effective. And the answer might surprise you. It wasn't their weapons or their ships or even their legendary berserker rage. It was their understanding of human psychology. Vikings were master practitioners of what modern military theorists call shock and awe. But they didn't need smart bombs or stealth aircraft. They had something more primitive and, arguably, more effective: pure terror. Consider the Viking battle cry. Archaeological evidence suggests that Vikings didn't just shout before battle. They performed elaborate vocal rituals designed to induce altered states of consciousness in both themselves and their enemies. Recent studies of ancient Norse poetry reveal complex rhythmic patterns that match what neuroscientists now recognize as frequency ranges capable of triggering panic responses in human brains. The berserker phenomenon was even more sophisticated. These weren't warriors who simply fought without armor. They were practitioners of what can only be described as combat hypnosis. Archaeological analysis of berserker remains shows evidence of deliberate scarification, ritual drug use, and psychological conditioning that began in early childhood. Dr. Neil Price, a leading expert on Viking warfare from Uppsala University, made a disturbing discovery while analyzing berserker burial sites. The bone modifications found on these skeletons suggest that berserkers underwent surgical procedures to enhance their pain tolerance and combat effectiveness. They were literally transforming their bodies into weapons. But the real genius of Viking combat was their group tactics. While medieval European armies relied on rigid formations and centralized command, Vikings fought as coordinated wolf packs. Each warrior was trained to operate independently while maintaining perfect synchronization with his brothers in arms. The shield wall, their signature formation, wasn't just defensive. It was a psychological weapon. Imagine facing a line of screaming warriors, each one convinced that death in battle would grant him eternal paradise. The shields locked together created not just physical protection, but psychological unity. When one Viking felt fear, the wall absorbed it. When one Viking felt rage, the wall amplified it. Their weapons were designed for maximum psychological impact as much as physical damage. The Danish axe, with its elongated handle and massive blade, wasn't just for cutting. The sight of a Viking warrior wielding a weapon taller than most men, capable of cleaving through mail armor and bone with equal ease, was intended to break enemy morale before combat even began. But perhaps most terrifying was their approach to battlefield medicine. Vikings didn't retreat when wounded. They incorporated their injuries into their fighting style. Missing an eye? You developed peripheral vision that could track multiple opponents simultaneously. Lost a hand? You learned to fight with weapons designed for single-handed use. Every scar became a tactical advantage. The sagas tell us of warriors who continued fighting with mortal wounds, not from ignorance of their condition, but from tactical calculation. A dying Viking could tie up multiple enemies, allowing his brothers to exploit the numerical advantage. Death wasn't failure, retreat was failure. This created a feedback loop that made Vikings increasingly effective with each generation. While Vikings perfected the art of personal combat, Navy SEALs represent the pinnacle of warfare evolution. But their greatest advantage isn't their technology. It's their understanding of warfare as a system rather than a series of individual battles. A Navy SEAL team doesn't just train to fight, they train to think like their enemies, to anticipate responses several moves ahead, to adapt their tactics in real time based on changing conditions. This level of strategic sophistication would have been incomprehensible to Viking warriors, who relied on proven tactics passed down through oral tradition. Consider the planning phase of a modern SEAL operation. Intelligence gathering can take months. satellite reconnaissance, electronic surveillance, human intelligence, and psychological profiling create a three-dimensional picture of the target environment. By the time SEALs engage, they know their enemies better than the enemies know themselves. The training reflects this complexity. SEALs don't just learn to shoot, they learn ballistics, wind patterns, and material penetration characteristics. They don't just learn to fight, they learn anatomy, psychology, and cultural anthropology. A modern SEAL warrior carries in his mind more tactical knowledge than an entire Viking army possessed collectively. But perhaps most critically, SEALs have mastered the one thing that Vikings never could: precision violence. Where Vikings excelled at total warfare, SEALs excel at surgical strikes. They can eliminate specific threats while leaving everything else untouched. This isn't just impressive, it's evolutionary. The physical conditioning is equally advanced. While Vikings develop strength and endurance through practical necessity, SEALs use scientifically designed training protocols that push human performance to theoretical limits. Their cardiovascular capacity, reaction times, and pain tolerance are measurably superior to any warriors in human history. The psychological training is even more sophisticated. SEALs are conditioned to operate under stress levels that would incapacitate normal humans. They train in environments designed to replicate the chaos, confusion, and terror of real combat. But unlike berserkers, who channeled their psychological state into rage, SEALs channel theirs into clarity. Modern combat medicine gives SEALs another massive advantage. Where Vikings had to incorporate their wounds into their fighting style, SEALs can often continue fighting as if unwounded. Advanced medical training means that injuries that would have been fatal to Vikings become minor inconveniences to SEALs. The communication technology alone would give SEALs a decisive advantage in any prolonged engagement. Real-time coordination, satellite navigation, and electronic warfare capabilities would allow a small SEAL team to outmaneuver and outfight a much larger Viking force through superior information management. But technology isn't the only evolution. SEALs have developed something that Vikings, for all their tactical brilliance, never achieved: the ability to learn and adapt in real time. Viking tactics were perfected through trial and error across generations. SEAL tactics evolve during individual missions based on immediate feedback. So who would win? The answer depends entirely on the conditions of engagement. And that's where this hypothetical battle becomes genuinely fascinating. In a modern battlefield, with SEALs utilizing their full technological advantage, the outcome isn't even close. Vikings would be eliminated before they knew they were under attack. Satellite surveillance would track their approach. Precision airstrikes would destroy their ships before they reached shore. Long-range snipers would eliminate key leaders from distances that Vikings couldn't even comprehend. But strip away the technology. Put both forces on equal ground, with equivalent weapons and no support systems. Now, the calculation becomes terrifyingly complex. Vikings possess something that modern warriors, for all their training, might lack: absolute commitment to death before dishonor. When your enemy literally believes that retreating is worse than dying, conventional tactical thinking breaks down. How do you intimidate someone who considers intimidation a gift? The physical conditioning creates another variable. Vikings were conditioned from birth for close quarters combat. Their entire lifestyle was preparation for personal violence. SEALs are incredibly fit, but their fitness is optimized for their operational environment. In prolonged hand-to-hand combat, the Viking advantage might be decisive. the psychological warfare cuts both ways. SEALs are trained to exploit enemy psychology, but Vikings were masters of psychological projection. The sight of berserkers in full battle fury has been documented to cause enemy armies to flee without engaging. Could even the mental conditioning of SEALs withstand that level of psychological assault? Numbers become critical in this scenario. A single SEAL team, typically 6 to 8 operators, might face a Viking raiding party of 50 to 100 warriors. In modern warfare, this numerical disadvantage is irrelevant due to technological force multipliers. In hand-to-hand combat, it could be insurmountable. But here's where it gets really interesting. Military historians have actually studied this question, and their conclusion is disturbing. The outcome might depend less on training or weapons than on the rules of engagement. If the battle is fought under modern rules of war, with concern for collateral damage and civilian casualties, Vikings would have a massive advantage. Their willingness to employ total warfare tactics would force SEALs into reactive, defensive postures. Vikings didn't recognize non-combatants. Everyone was either ally or enemy. If the battle is fought under Viking rules, where the only objective is the complete destruction of the enemy force, SEALs might find their precision training less useful than their ability to think strategically under pressure. They would need to abandon their sophisticated tactics and engage in the kind of brutal, direct violence that Vikings perfected. The most likely scenario, according to military analysts who have war-gamed similar hypothetical conflicts, is a protracted engagement where both sides suffer catastrophic casualties. Vikings would inflict massive initial damage through their shock tactics and complete disregard for personal safety. SEALs would adapt quickly and begin to neutralize the Viking advantages through superior tactical flexibility. The survivors on both sides would be fundamentally changed by the experience. Vikings would have faced opponents whose fighting skills matched their own dedication. SEALs would have encountered an enemy who couldn't be defeated through conventional tactical thinking. But perhaps we're asking the wrong question. Maybe the real insight isn't about who would win, but about what these warriors represent. Vikings and Navy SEALs are separated by 1,000 years of human evolution, yet they share something fundamental: the willingness to face death in service of something larger than themselves. Both cultures produced warriors who redefined what human beings are capable of achieving under extreme pressure. Both developed training methods that push the boundaries of human performance. Both created legends that continue to influence military thinking centuries after their prime. The Vikings remind us that technology isn't everything, that raw human determination, combined with tactical brilliance and absolute commitment, can achieve the seemingly impossible. They conquered half of Europe with iron weapons and wooden ships because they refused to accept limitations that other cultures considered natural law. Navy SEALs represent the culmination of that same warrior spirit, enhanced by scientific understanding and technological capability. They've taken the Viking dedication to excellence and applied systematic methodology to create warriors more capable than any in human history. In the end, maybe the question isn't who would win in battle. Maybe the question is what we can learn from both about the potential that exists in every human being when we refuse to accept the word impossible. The next time you face a challenge that seems insurmountable, ask yourself, what would a Viking do? What would a SEAL do? The answer might surprise you. The battle between Vikings and Navy SEALs will never happen. But the battle between your limitations and your potential happens every day. Which warrior will you choose to be? If this exploration into the minds of history's greatest warriors has left you wanting more, there are stories even more incredible waiting to be discovered. Stories of battles that did happen, warriors who did exist, and victories that changed the course of human history forever. The question is, are you brave enough to hear them?